Hello, I'm Dan Ware. Welcome to another Frankly Franklin. In a few weeks, we will be observing Veterans Day here and across the country, a time to honor the veterans of all our foreign wars. But this year is the 50th anniversary of what came to be called the Forgotten War, the Korean conflict, which was fought between 1950 and 1953. And so in the weeks to come, I hope to be interviewing some veterans of that Korean conflict who live here now in Franklin and Simpson County, and get them to share with us their recollections of that time. Those of you who saw the programs that we did with veterans of World War II will know sort of what to expect. We'll be chatting with people who served in various capacities during that time. And not only is it the 50th anniversary, but it is perhaps timely because North Korea has been in the news of late, and certainly the United States continues to have troops stationed in South Korea. So I hope you will find this segment very interesting. For my first guest, I have with me today Major Bradford, whom many of you may know. Major was a successful businessman here in Franklin for a number of years, retired now, and he was active in civic affairs. So he may be someone who is familiar to you in that capacity, but perhaps you may not have known that when he was a younger man, he spent, I think, 17 months, he told me before we started, over in the Korean Peninsula. Major, thanks for agreeing to come in and do that.
Okay.
Maybe it won't be quite as bad as having to face a firing squad anyway. Before we start talking about the war, let me ask you about your name. Now, is Major a first name or a middle name? And I don't know a lot of people with that name, so I bet you're named after somebody.
It's my middle name, and I'm named after my mother's great-grandfather, Major Cumbie.
I see.
So, and then I've named one of my sons that.
So that's kind of a family tradition.
Family tradition.
Okay. Now, is your family from this area? Did you grow up here, or?
I grew up in Warren County.
In Warren County.
Came to Franklin and opened my business in '61, July '61.
I see. Well, as you were growing up, if you served in Korea, then you're old enough to remember World War II.
Yeah, I was 10 years old when Pearl Harbor was bombed, and I had two brothers in the World War II.
You did, yeah. Well, did your family listen regularly to the radio for war news during that time?
We listened to old Gabriel Heater.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes, there's good news tonight. That was his favorite slogan.
Uh-huh. Well, I expect when you were listening to that war news, you didn't have any idea that within 10 years you might be in the military and in a wartime situation too, did you?
That was never in my mind that I would be there in 10 years.
Yeah. Did your older brothers, when they came back, did they talk much about what happened to them during the war? Or?
Yeah, I had one brother that was in the Navy, and he left December the 7th, 1941 to go to Louisville to join the Navy, and he was one of the first ones out of the city to get into the Navy. And he told me,
he heard about Pearl Harbor
when it was bombed, he took off.
Oh, okay,
and
right then.
Joined. He was, I think he was about 16 or 17 years old.
So volunteered and sent me over.
Volunteered, and he was gone.
So he was in the Navy. Now, what about your other?
My other brother was in the Army.
Okay.
But he never got out of the States.
He stayed stateside. All right. Well, what branch of the service did you go into?
I was in the Army.
Okay. Now, were you conscripted? Did you volunteer, or?
I was too young for the draft, and so I volunteered. About a year before I'd be drafted, I volunteered.
Okay. Now, had the conflict in Korea started at that point?
Yes, it started in '50, and I went in '51.
So when you went in, you probably knew that the chances were pretty good that you were going to be shipped over there, right?
About 90%.
Yeah. Now, did you serve in a combat unit or a support unit? What type of unit were you in?
I was in a combat unit, 3rd Infantry Division, and we had what we called automatic weapons. It was a self-propelled unit.
Mm-hmm.
We had half tracks with quad 50s, and we had full tracks with twin 40s, and then we had personnel carriers.
I see. Well, now, you got over there after training. You said you got over there in 52, right?
Yeah, I got to Korea either the last part of February of 52 or the first part of March of 52.
Yeah. Well, now, I did a little reading on the course of the war to get ready for this interview, and according to what I read, it started and the North Koreans invaded, and they had pretty good success, and then MacArthur landed and kind of cut them off, pushed them back, and it shifted toward the South Koreans, the side the U.S. was on, and then the Chinese came in and it shifted back. So by the time you arrived, did you have an idea who was winning or where things stood?
Well, by the time I got there, we went in at Incheon too, and
Which is where MacArthur had
where
made that
MacArthur
landing.
went in, but it was beginning to stabilize as far as the main line of resistance. We pretty well knew that our enemy was the north of us,
Mm-hmm.
and we either made pushes of maybe 2 or 3 miles or stay right where we were, just defending what we had.
So from the time you were in till they signed an armistice, really not a whole lot of land changed hands, not a whole lot of...
No, I'd say that it wouldn't vary very much. We might lose one day and gain it back the next day, but most of the time your divisions had their own territory, and we pretty well held our territory.
Mhm.
But at night we'd go out and harass,
You're right, right.
You'd do patrols at night and harass,
Mhm.
stuff like that.
So were there not too many major pitched battles, but more of this
Well,
smaller action?
when I first got there, I think there was, looking at the magazines,
Uh-huh.
there were a couple of 3 good battles. I think I was there during maybe Heartbreak Ridge, and I can't recall the name of the other
Yeah,
battle.
some of the ones that I remembered, the Heartbreak Ridge I'd heard of, and the Pork Chop Hill.
Hill, and there was
Now, some of them were kind of Korean names, and that didn't mean anything to me.
right.
It might have to you.
But we were trying to get as much territory as we could before we decided on the line of demarcation.
I see. Because I believe there were peace talks that were going on even as you all were fighting, right?
Right. They were negotiating, and like I say, the American command was trying to gain all the ground back that they could possibly do if there was going to be a peace treaty.
Right. Now, I think that Korea had been pretty well divided after World War II, and then the North Koreans had invaded, I guess, wanting to combine the country.
It was split at the 38th parallel.
Yeah. How did people back home feel about the U.S. fighting over there? I know in World War II, with Hitler in Germany and the Japanese attacking us, I'm sure nobody questioned that we ought to be in there. But a little peninsula like Korea, was it hard for people to accept that so soon after a big war, here we were in combat again?
I didn't recall of ever hearing anybody against our action.
Okay.
And I know that what time I was over there, my family and people that I knew, they were supportive of us.
Mm-hmm. When you were stationed over there, did you hear back from home? Did you get letters very often, or did it take them weeks and months to catch up with you?
Well, we'd have mail call maybe 2 or 3 times a week,
Yeah.
and usually when my mom would write, or some of my brothers and sisters, it would probably be a week or 10 days old.
Yeah. Were you, I don't know how old for sure you were, but did you get pretty homesick?
Well, I was 20 when I went in, and I was just barely 21 when I got to Korea. And no, I guess I was just full of adventure.
Yeah.
And after I got there, I said, well, I'm here. I'm just going to make the best of it. And I.
Yeah. What what were your conditions like? Were you sleeping out in the field most nights? Did you sleep in foxholes, or did you all have tents, barracks? What was...
Well, when I first got there, I was in what they call division rear, and then we went forward. And when we went forward, we had bunkers, or we dig in the hillside. They dig it in and put tents, and then sandbag the tents all the way up and camouflage the tents. And well, it wasn't the best accommodations, but we could keep warm. Winters we get over there 30 below zero easily.
I had heard it was pretty cold over
And
there.
we had good sleeping bags. The second winter I was over there, I mean, I got there on the tail end of the first winter that I was there, and we didn't have like Mickey Mouse boots and insulated parkers and things. But the second winter I was there, you could survive.
Well, that's good. Yeah.
And then of course you eat a lot of sea rations.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So a lot of food out of a tin, right?
Right.
Not a lot of cook fires, I don't guess.
You know, unless you was in what we call blocking position, and if you was in the blocking position, our cooks would cook us some hot meals.
Well, I'm sure you talked about, you know, going out on the perimeter and territory trading back and forth. You'd been trained in the United States, but does training, can it really prepare you for somebody on the other side shooting live ammunition at you? I mean, how do you prepare for something like that?
I think that your training comes about 5 minutes after you've been there. You get into a squad with some guys that's already been there, and they take care of you. And we always took care of the new recruits coming in, but it doesn't take but just a few minutes, then you know what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Once you've been there a while, do you feel like you can judge, well, yeah, I can, you know, I hear this gunfire, but I know it's not real close, or, guys, this is serious, this is right in on top of us? I mean, how do you...
Well, I guess when you first get there, you're not too concerned about it, but the longer you're there and the closer you get to coming home, the more scared you are and the more cautious you are. But usually at night was when the Koreans would really harass you. Early in the morning and at night. Bed check Charlie.
Oh, that was the name for it, huh?
He'd come over and drop a lot of times they'd drop mortar shells out of the plane, you know, just anything to harass you so you couldn't sleep.
Did you ever encounter any North Korean or Chinese troops, you know, close up where you could look them in the eye?
No, I wasn't in any hand-to-hand. Our units would usually, our vehicles would be behind the infantry as the infantry would be progressing up a mountainside, we'll say. Well, our quad 50s and twin 40s would be shooting right above their head, just keeping the enemy down.
Try to pin them down.
And
so
the only time we'd be in touch with them is when some would get through the line and slip through the line, and then we'd have to take care of them, you know, but that wasn't very often.
I see. What about the civilian population? Were your positions close to any villages? Did you encounter any South Koreans, and how did they feel about Americans?
Well, it was kind of according to what area you was in. A lot of times we'd be in an area where there would be some civilians that could get pretty close to where we were, but as the war stabilized, they kept the Koreans, civilians, out of the area because a lot of our areas were landmined, and these, like the women, we call them mama sons and papa sons, they'd come up wanting to go to where their rice paddies were or something. They'd step on landmines, and that was a sad part of it.
Yeah, yeah, because I guess they needed to get in the rice paddy because they needed to feed their family. And
yeah,
it had been,
try to put out a crop.
Yeah, and I'll bet back then they didn't have the same kind of mine detection equipment that the military has today, right?
No, the civilians had none. I mean,
right, right.
But the fields would be marked, but still, though, they'd walk right through them.
Right, right. And I guess that that was a pretty hard life over there to try to raise a family, make a living, and there's fighting going on all around you.
Oh, yeah, and they were all separated and split up. Kids would sneak into our areas, and we'd feed them, no family. Just young kids, I mean, toddlers. But they grew up real in a hurry. But
Because they're pretty much on their own with no family.
Right,
Yeah.
and if our command caught us with any of them, they'd make us send them back, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Were you constantly up near the front lines, or did you get any chance to, you know, a little R&R? Did you see any cities over there or anything?
Well, when I first got there, went in at Incheon, and I went to Seoul, and I was in Seoul about 2 or 3 months, and then when I went forward, well, then we went to a lot of bombed out cities. But then everybody in Korea got to go to Japan I think you had to be there about 6 months or 7 months, and we'd get to go to Japan for 5 days and 5 nights of what they call R&R,
Yeah.
rest and recreation.
Yeah, I bet everybody looked forward to that.
They sure
yeah.
did.
So I guess you saw Tokyo then, probably?
No, I went through Japan at Tokyo and Camp Drake at I forgot the name of the city on the coast where we shipped out, but on both of my R&Rs, I went to North Japan,
Yeah.
a place called Kokura.
How does that part of the world look compared to the way the United States looks? Is it similar or not?
Well, when I was there in Korea, it was very backward. All you saw was big oxens pulling ox carts, and they used the ox to turn the rice paddies. No vehicles.
No tractors,
And
no cars.
all the men wore big old white flowing garments with a big black hat that was made out of horsehair, and he was always the head of the family. And but now they tell me Seoul is one of the larger cities in the world.
Yeah,
But when I was there, it was nothing but rubble.
I see. Yeah, yeah. Of course, over 50 years' time, they've had a chance to
It's a chance to really
rebuild and grow their
Right,
economy.
right.
Yeah, yeah. You ever had any desire to go back there and see it after all this time?
Yeah, I had one chance once to go as a Rotary a group leader for some children, but at that time I was still, struggling with my business, and it was going to be gone over about 2 months, and I felt like I couldn't be gone that long from
Yeah,
my business.
pretty long time
But
away,
yeah, I'd
yeah.
like to go back.
While you were over there, I guess by the time you got there, had President Truman replaced General MacArthur
He had
already?
just replaced him when I got there, yeah.
Okay. Did you meet any of the generals or anybody that's a name we might recall, any top brass or anything?
Well, yeah, the first thing I remember was I got to see Billy Graham.
Oh, was he over there?
He was
for,
there, yeah. Well, he came into our area, and I got pictures of him. But I guess the biggest dignitary that I met was Major John Eisenhower. He was in the 3rd Division.
Now, was that President Eisenhower's son?
Major
Okay.
John. And one time we went back to the shower point, and every once in a while we'd go back to the shower point and we'd get clean clothes and a good hot shower and deloused, and I ran into the shower, and it was a soapy rubber runner, and it was in cold weather, and I almost knocked him down. In fact, I think I knocked him down, and so he laughed about it, and we went outside and we got pictures together of me and Major John Eisenhower.
And you still got those pictures
Yes,
today?
uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, talking about Eisenhower, of course, 52 was when Eisenhower ran for president, and people had their "I like Ike" buttons and all of that. Was he campaigning as far as he would bring a stop to the war, or? Of course, if you were over there, I don't know that you saw that much about the campaign.
Well, we'd get it in Stars and Stripes. I remember he made the promise that if I'm elected president, I'll bring the boys home. And I told my mother, I wrote my mother, and I said, you be sure and vote for Eisenhower. And
Did the troops get to vote? Could you all send a vote back home? Or?
I don't recall
Yeah.
whether they'd send us absentee ballots or not. I really don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think I got to vote.
Okay. But, of course, Eisenhower won, and then I guess it was the next year that there was a armistice declared.
Right. Well, he came to our outfit. He promised to come to Korea, and he
Yeah.
did. And he came to our outfit, 3rd Division, because that's where his son was.
But now, were you still there at that point? Or
Yes,
Okay. Did you see?
No, we were lined up. The road that he was going to come in, they had us lined up on the sides of the road with all of our weapons, and I just got a glance of him coming by.
how long, when they would send you over, how long was a tour of duty over there before you could come back stateside?
A tour of duty, if you was on the line constantly, you'd get 4 points a month, and it took 36 points to rotate, 9 months average.
Okay. But you say you spent 17 over there?
Yeah, well, after I got over there and got used to it and knew that I didn't have much more time left in my enlistment, I just stayed on I extended a couple of times because I felt like I could be a better soldier in Korea than I could in the United States.
I see. Well, during all that time, did you ever feel so threatened, like, I don't know if I'm going to get out of this alive? Was it ever that intense?
I guess I was young enough and that really I thought that I was, this couldn't happen to me if I watched what I was doing.
Yeah.
I guess all young men think that.
Well, that's what you would want a soldier to think, too, I would guess, yeah. So eventually, after that amount of time, then you came back stateside.
Right.
A little bit before the armistice was signed.
I left my outfit on July the 3rd of '53, and then when we were on the ship coming home, I think July 28th when they declared an armistice, I believe. And I was en route home when the firing stopped.
But a lot of our troops stayed there after the armistice, and we have troops still there today.
Right.
And you were telling me before we started that you've got another family member who went to Korea many years after you.
Right.
And tell our audience a little bit about that.
Well, my son John Major, he's a first lieutenant in the Army and the Health Corps, and he's stationed in Japan right out of Tokyo, but most of his travels are in Korea. In fact, I think he's due over there next week, and he goes up to the DMZ. He's in charge of field sanitation, biological warfare, and chemical. And he's in Korea quite often right now.
With this news where North Korea has admitted that they've got a nuclear weapons program, of course the U.S. wants that done away with. If somebody goes there to inspect or something, might he be involved in that, perhaps?
I don't think he'd be qualified to inspect and find atomic bombs, but yeah, right now he goes right to the DMZ, and he says it's pretty touchy right now.
Yeah, there's been something of an effort in the last few years to reestablish communications between North and South, and I know the railroad and everything was cut during the war and stayed cut for a long time. Do you think that's a good idea? Would you like to see closer relations between the North and South? Or?
Yeah, I would, for the simple reason that an awful lot of South Koreans have relatives and that's still in North Korea that they lost contact with, well, actually in 1950, I guess, and some of them get a chance to go across and see them, and some get a chance to come back to the South and see them. And I think that they should let those people go back and forth across the border to see their relatives and loved ones. And they're definitely, I guess they're going to put build the train track back. It was a track, it ran right through the center of Korea from Busan all the way up to the Yalu River.
Yeah, and it was the Yalu River that the Chinese came across to come into the battle. Yeah. Well, I started by saying that some people after it referred to the Korean conflict as the forgotten war. Do you agree with that, and why do you think that is?
Well, it'd be just hard for me to sit here and say that it was a forgotten war. It certainly wasn't a forgotten war for us boys that were over there.
Yeah.
And we were just fighting for something that you could never accomplish the winning. It's about like the boys in the Vietnam War. We were over there, and we were at the end, all we were doing was just keeping the North Koreans coming back down into South Korea. We really didn't win the war, but we didn't lose the war.
Right.
And we still hadn't won it, and we still hadn't lost it in 50 years from now.
Because the armistice and the 38th parallel, that was pretty much where it was before all that,
right,
wasn't it?
That was settled. I think Russia decided, and the United States decided that they'd split Korea at the 38th parallel during World War II.
Yeah. By the time of the Korean conflict, television had been invented. I remember years later watching a program that Edward R. Murrah he'd gone to Korea and recorded a program. Did you, in the time you were there, did you encounter any reporters or anybody trying to cover and report the war?
No, we never got any in our outfit. The only things that we would get would be the USO shows. And then
did you get to see Bob Hope or anybody?
Bob never did get to our outfit, but some of his group came to our outfit. We had there was one place called the Bulldozer Bowl. That's what it was called. And I remember one time they let us all go back, brought in trucks, and we all went back there, and there was a bunch of Nashville stars from
country music
stars. But then there would be some people that was in Bob Hope's group there, but Bob Hope never. I never did get to see him.
Did you ever watch the television program MASH? Do you think that was anything like what it was like in Korea, or?
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in it, because I know one time we were stationed near some. Our line was near some MASH hospitals, which meant mobile Army surgical hospitals, and some of the guys would get back to the hospital and come back and tell us, about. Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that MASH, but still, then it wasn't. They didn't have a good time like those guys on MASH had.
Yeah, they probably didn't feel like cutting up to the same way that those guys did. Or the folks back home, they were, I'm sure, getting war news, and were they really concerned about your well-being? Were their letters? Did they sound concerned, or they're trying to cheer you up and tell you news about birthdays and normal stuff? Or?
Yeah, my mother would write me quite often, and some of my brothers and and my sisters, and of course Mama she'd send me clippings out of the old Park City Daily News, and was always glad to get that.
Yeah. Well, once you got back stateside then, and what did you enlist for, like 4 years or
2 years?
2 years.
Like the draft.
Okay.
And when I got back I had to land back at New York City, and by the time we got back to New York City and went through all that and got to Fort Meade, Maryland, my term of enlistment was almost up, like in 2 or 3 days.
Did you come back to Heroes Welcome? Did you get to be in parades and stuff? Or?
Well, I was either on the first ship or the second ship. People on the East Coast was complaining that all the returning Korean War veterans were landing in California.
Yeah.
So I guess the Chamber of Commerce had enough weight that they started diverting some ships to New York City.
Well, what, y'all go through the Panama Canal to get over there?
Went through the Panama Canal, and spent 2 or 3 days in Honolulu and a couple of days in the Panama Canal zone. And when we landed in New York City, then it was a short Heroes Welcome, and then they put us on ferries, boats, and then we circled around the Statue of Liberty, and the tugboats would shoot out the colored water.
Yeah.
And,
that sounds like real interesting times.
Well, of course,
I
was young enough to really enjoy that.
Yeah. Well, after seeing the world, was it hard to come back to Kentucky and kind of pick up where you'd left off? Or?
No, I was certainly glad to get back.
Yeah. And then you, I guess, came home and started working for a living and started a family. And
well, I got back and started in working, and went to college and got my degree, and I was always in the parts business, I guess, ever since I was a young boy. And so after I got my degree, I went to work for a store in Bowling Green, and the next thing you knew, I was in Franklin with my own store.
I see. And I assume you've had no reason to regret that.
Oh, no.
Enjoyed your years here in Franklin.
Oh, yeah, I'm still enjoying them.
Well, that's good. Well, our time's about up, but I've learned a lot. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I expect many of our listeners have too. So our thanks to Major Bradford for coming in today to share with us his recollections of 50 years ago and the Korean conflict. Hopefully I'll have some other Korean veterans on future programs, and we'll hear their reminiscences as well. In the meantime, we'll be right back with another segment. Henry Stone will be on with his guest. So as always, we thank you for watching, and we hope you'll stay tuned. Thanks, Major.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay.
That wasn't bad.
Not bad at all.
Welcome to another segment of Frankly Franklin. I'm Henry Stone. We have a very important topic today, something that's going on in our community in this part of the state at this time. It's called United Way. Pleased to have as guest this morning Doug Eberhardt, the president of United Way of Southern Kentucky, and Steve Thurman, who's been connected with United Way of Southern Kentucky since its existence, I guess. Steve has been the chairman of United Way of Southern Kentucky, and I believe we'll go back into that office again next year. Gentlemen, we're really glad to have you with us.
Thank you for having us.
I'd like for the two of you to give your backgrounds in United Way.
Okay. Actually, I'm a new president here. I've only been here since the first of this year, and I transferred or moved from another United Way located in Cleveland, Tennessee, where I was involved in allocations and community planning, and been doing nonprofit work for about 15 years, but recently with United Way for about the last five and a half years.